The content on the Unitails channel is protected by copyright. Unauthorized use may result in legal liability. Sometimes it seems to me that silence is louder than any gunshot. It penetrates under the skin, leaving behind a feeling of emptiness that neither words nor memories can fill. I am accustomed to the sounds of war, the rhythmic click of the rifle bolt, the short, clipped commands, the hum of helicopters dissolving into the bloody sunset. These sounds were a part of me like breathing. They shaped me, taught me to distinguish lies from truth, fear from instinct. But that was long ago. Now my morning starts with the creak of the coffee machine. I wake up at 5:30, not because I need to, but because I can't do otherwise. Habit. The service ends, but habits remain, as if they are parts of the body that cannot be amputated. I sit on the edge of the bed, the slight creak of the mattress, the steady breathing of my wife next to me. Diana. I watch her in the dim light. Her face is calm, as if the world around her cannot offer anything that would disrupt this harmony. Strange. Just a few years ago, I was sure that I was her world. I get up, try not to wake her. I tiptoe to the bathroom. Cold water invigorates better than any coffee. The mirror reflects a face I no longer recognize. The scars are not on the outside, they're inside. I go downstairs to the kitchen. My steps sound dull on the wooden floor. The window above the sink is fogged up from the morning moisture. Outside the window, perfect suburbia, neatly trimmed lawns, polished pathways, the neighbor's dog barking at the same time every day. It's all just scenery. I turn on the coffee maker. The machine begins to hum, filling the kitchen with the only sound. I watch as drops of hot black coffee slowly trickle into the cup. This is my ritual. Simple, like a military regulation. Get up, drink, start the day. Half an hour later, Diana comes downstairs. She adjusts her hair slightly, her face bearing a light, sleepy smile. "You didn't sleep again, did you?" she asks, pouring herself some coffee. "It's all right," I reply, not delving into details. She's used to these short answers. We sit at the table. We are silent. We don't need to talk. I used to think it was the comfortable silence of two people who understand each other without words. Now I'm not sure. Maybe it's just the silence between two strangers. There's a newspaper on the table. I absent-mindedly flip through the pages. Economic news, sports results, another politician caught in corruption. The world turns as usual, and I'm just an observer. Soon Sophie appears, our daughter. She's like a ray of sunshine that hasn't yet realized a storm might start outside. Her eyes sparkle. She wears a simple dress that highlights her pregnant belly. "Good morning, Dad." She kisses me on the cheek, sitting next to me. "Morning, sunshine. How are you?" "Great." The baby's kicking as if he's preparing for a marathon. We laugh. For a moment, it feels real. Then Alex comes in. The perfect son-in-law. A bright white smile. A perfectly ironed shirt. A faint scent of expensive perfume. He approaches Sophie, kisses her on the forehead, then nods at me. "Morning, Robert." "Morning." He always calls me by my name. Never Dad or anything of that sort. It's a small thing, but it leaves a bitter taste. In the Army, I knew how to recognize a person by their gestures, looks, voice. Something is off with Alex. They say cracks in the glass don't appear all at once. First, it's a barely noticeable line, thin as a hair. It doesn't catch the eye, but one day you look at it from another angle and realize the glass has long been broken. You just didn't want to see it. I began to notice. First, the little things. They always start with little things. Diana started coming home late. The meeting with a client dragged on. Stopped by a friend's after work. Got held up at training. The explanation sounded mundane, as if that's how it should be. But her voice, it was different. Not fake, no. It was too even lifeless. Like a soldier reading an order. I watched. I didn't ask. I just remembered. One evening, coming home a bit earlier than usual, I saw her quickly put her phone in her bag, as if by reflex. As if she didn't want me to see something on the screen. "Who called?" I asked casually, not looking directly at her. She flinched slightly. "Huh? No one. Just spam." I nodded. Just nodded. But inside, something clenched. Not because of the call. Because of how easily she lied. Alex changed too. Before, he laughed loudly, joked inappropriately, tried to please. Now he was more reserved, but not because he matured. His smile became measured, as if he put it on like a suit. He came home late, said it was work. Sometimes he smelled of perfume, not his own. I remembered something from my service. A real threat doesn't look threatening. It smiles. One evening, I entered the office, a forgotten corner of the house where I kept old papers, records, army photos. Diana's phone was on the desk, unlocked. That's rare. Very rare. I didn't want to. I told myself, don't need to. But my hand reached out. In the messages, nothing special. Usual conversations. But too clean. As if someone meticulously cleaned it all up. Only one message stood out from the rest. No name, just a number. Today, I put the phone back. My heart beat dull, like a drum before battle. The next day, I decided to follow Alex. Not as a husband suspecting infidelity, as a scout seeking a target. He left the office later than usual, but didn't head home. I kept my distance, knowing how not to attract attention. Alex stopped at a small bar on the outskirts of town. Met someone. I couldn't see the face of the second person, just a silhouette. They talked quietly, too seriously for friends, too cautiously for colleagues. After half an hour, Alex left. I sat in the car, staring at the spot where they had talked. In my chest, a strange feeling. This wasn't about jealousy. It was about something more. When I returned home, I saw Diana in the kitchen. She was chopping vegetables for dinner, smiling at nothing. I watched her for a long time. Too long. What? She asked, not looking up, just thinking about how quickly time flies. She smiled. Yes, you don't notice how everything changes. I smirked. You don't notice. Until it's too late. They say that the loudest explosions happen in silence. There are no warning sirens, no countdown. Just a click inside, and your reality is torn to shreds. Tonight it all started with silence. I woke up because something was wrong. Not a sound, not a light. Just emptiness beside me. A cold sheet, a crumpled blanket, and a feeling that the air in the room had become heavier. The clock showed 2:47. Diana was not there. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The house was silent, but not the calm, familiar kind. It was the silence that hides before a storm, when the air itself knows something is wrong. I stood up, slowly, every movement like a strained nerve. I passed by Sophie's empty bedroom. The light in the hallway softly illuminated only shadows, making it feel even worse. A board creaked underfoot on the stairs, so quietly that only I heard it. Downstairs, a light was on, the kitchen, and there they were, Diana and Alex. They hadn't heard me. She was sitting on the table, head slightly tilted back, his arms wrapped around her like a snake. Their breathing was synchronized, as if they had rehearsed it 1,000 times. I froze in the doorway. My brain tried to believe that it wasn't what I was seeing. Maybe it's a dream. Maybe the alcohol in my blood is playing a cruel joke. But no, it was real. He was fucking my wife, my daughter's husband. Everything inside me contracted. Not anger. No, it was worse. Emptiness. Black, cold emptiness that spread through my veins, squeezing out the remnants of reason. I didn't think. I moved. What the fuck? The voice burst out on its own, loud like a gunshot. Diana flinched and turned around. Her eyes fear. Not shame. Fear. Alex recoiled, as if ID scalded him with boiling water. Robert, it's not, he began. I didn't let him finish. I lunged forward, and my fist smashed into his face. Clean, on the cheekbone, the crunch of bone under skin. He fell, but I didn't stop. Punches, one after another. In the jaw, the nose, the chest. He tried to resist. Grabbed my arms, but it was pitiful. I hit harder. I hit as if each blow was a year of lies. Robert, stop. Diana tried to grab my shoulder, but I shoved her so hard she fell to the floor. Alex groaned, trying to crawl away. I grabbed his hair, lifted his head, and looked right into his blood-filled face. You thought you could fuck my wife and stay alive? I growled. He tried to smirk through the blood. Maybe, if you were more of a man, she wouldn't have looked for someone else. Click. Something broke. I hit him so hard his head snapped back, hitting the floor. The creak of the stairs. Quiet, barely audible, but I heard it. Sophie. She stood at the top of the stairs in a nightgown, hair disheveled, face pale. Her eyes darted between me, Diana, and Alex, who was choking on blood. Dad, what? What's happening? Her voice trembled like a taut string. I turned to her. Everything inside clenched. Blood on my hands, on the floor, on me. The truth was here, in this room, like a knife plunged into the chest. I looked at her and said, "Your husband is fucking your mother. That's what's happening." The words were like a blow. She turned pale, her lips trembled. "What?" she whispered, stepping back. "You heard me. This bastard is fucking your mother. In our fucking kitchen." Diana stood up, trembling. "Robert, stop. Don't." I looked at her. "Don't. What exactly? Tell the truth? Or beat your boyfriend for giving you more than he gave his family." Sophie covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She took another step back and lost her balance. A dull thud. Diana screamed and rushed to her. I stood still, watching them like strangers. That night I realized, sometimes the enemy isn't the one shooting at you on the battlefield. Sometimes the enemy sleeps in your bed. Hospitals smell of death. Not antiseptics, not sterile sheets. Death. The smell hides in corners, between white walls and cold floors, seeping into the skin like a shadow that can't be washed off. I sit on a plastic chair, hands on my knees, gaze fixed on one point on the wall. A white crack in the paint, like a crack in the glass, like a crack in my life. Before me, a doctor. Young, tired, with the eyes of someone who has seen too much. He's saying something, moving his lips, but the sounds don't reach me. I hear only a hum, like the echo after an explosion. And one phrase cuts through the silence like a knife. "We did everything we could, but we couldn't save the child." Sophie is sobbing. Loudly. A piercing cry that cuts through the ears, but I feel no pain. She clutches her stomach as if she can bring back what darkness has already taken. Her hands tremble. Her lips whisper something unintelligible. Diana sits next to her, trying to comfort her, holding her, whispering something, but her voice is just an empty sound. I don't hear it. I watch them as if they are a scene from a movie. Something alien, distant. I stand up, unconsciously. Just stand up and walk down the hallway. White walls press in from all sides. People pass by. Nurses. Doctors. I don't see their faces. They don't matter. He stands by the wall. Alex. Alive. Breathing. Intact. After everything he's done, he's still here. He looks at me. His eyes red as if he's been crying. What right does he have to cry? I stop in front of him. He opens his mouth to say something. "Robert, I punch." My fist slams into his face, so hard he falls to the floor like a rag doll. The sound of the punch, clean like a gunshot. Sharp. Real. He chokes on blood, tries to get up, but I'm already looming over him. Again and again. Punch. For the child. Punch. For Sophie. Punch. For the years of lies. People scream. Someone tries to stop me, but I don't feel their hands on me. I am the storm. Too late to stop it. Finally, I pause. I look down at him. His face a bloody mess. He gasps, trying to breathe. I wipe the blood off my knuckles onto his shirt, stand up, and walk away. Without looking back. Outside, it's dark. The air is cold, but I don't feel the cold. I get into the car, close the door, look ahead at the dark road. One thought in my head, this is not the end. I start the engine, and at that moment, I realize the end was then, that night. Now something else begins, something that can't be stopped, something that can't be forgiven. The night is a strange thing. It's both calming and unsettling at the same time. The silence envelopes, but around every corner, something might be lurking, breathing in the darkness, waiting for you to blink. I returned home later than usual. The car drove through empty streets, headlights catching patches of asphalt, road signs that seemed redundant in this dead city. The house stood in darkness. No lights, like an empty shell. Usually, Diana left a lamp on in the hallway. Not today. I turned off the engine, sat in the car for a few seconds, listening to the silence. There was a strange feeling in my chest. Not anxiety. Instinct. It never lies. I got out. Locked the car. The keys clinked dully against the metal ring. Every sound seemed louder than it should. Step. Another step. The silence was too correct. And then I felt it. The first attacker sprang from the shadows on the left. He moved fast, a knife in his hand, aimed straight at me. But I was faster. A twist of the body, a sidestep, a sharp grasp of his wrist. The knife dropped. An elbow strike to the face. The crunch of a nose, a muffled groan. I didn't let him fall, held him by the collar, and struck again, this time to the throat. He wheezed and collapsed on the asphalt. The second attack from behind. I felt his breath before he could do anything. I turned, grabbed his arm holding the gun, twisted his wrist. A shot. A miss. The bullet went into the ground. A knee to the stomach, then a headbutt. His eyes rolled back. I took the gun and shot him in the chest without hesitation. Twice. For certainty. The third was smarter. He didn't charge head-on. I heard the click of a rifle somewhere in the darkness. Duck! A bullet whistled over my head. I took cover behind the car, breathing steady, heart beating at a regular pace. This wasn't fear. This was focus. I peeked out. A short burst from his automatic rifle. Not precise. Nerves. He's nervous. Bad for him. I circled around the other side of the car, crouching, while he waited for me to appear where I had been. A second, and I was next to him. Shot. He missed. He tried to reload, but I was already too close. I struck him with the butt of the gun across his face. He fell, trying to get up. I kicked him in the stomach. He wheezed, the gun flying out of his hands. Who sent you? I asked, pressing his face against the asphalt. He spat blood, trying to say something, but I didn't give him the time. Click shot. Silence returned. I searched the bodies. Phones. Wallet. No documents. On one of them, a smartphone with a cracked screen. I turn it on. No password. Fool. In the gallery, photographs. Of my family. Diana. Sophie. Our home. Me outside. As I leave in the morning. Each photograph like a bullet to the head. They have been watching me. For a long time. And another thing. Messages. Encrypted. But one visible. Target confirmed. Next stage. I stared at the screen. Feeling not rage rising inside. But something worse. Cold. This was no coincidence. Someone was playing with me. And I was going to find out who. I got into the car. Hands on the steering wheel. Knuckles bloody. But my heart calm. The game had begun. Hospitals are places where time stops. There is no future or past. Only an endless now, filled with the smell of antiseptics, sterile sheets, and a whisper that presses harder than a scream. I returned there in the morning. Not because I wanted to. Because I had to. Sophie lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by tubes and machines that beeped with cold regularity. Her face was pale, lips cracked, a thin line of sweat on her forehead. But she was alive. And the child, too. The doctor said it was a miracle. I don't believe in miracles. It was her character. Sophie had always been stronger than she seemed. You sit beside her. For a long time, just watching, finding no words. My fingers clenched into a fist, but my face remained calm, like a frozen mask. A rock. Not for me. For her. She opened her eyes. A weak, clouded gaze slid around the room and settled on me. Dad, her voice was barely audible, almost a whisper. I leaned closer, placing my hand on her arm. I'm here. Just those two words. Without excess. Without emotion. Like an anchor in a storm. She tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. The baby, he's alive. You did it. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but I squeezed her hand a bit tighter. Don't cry. You don't need tears now. Rest. They'll take care of everything. I left the room and, for the first time in a long time, allowed myself to breathe deeper. They were still breathing. That meant I could breathe too. But inside, it wasn't that simple. Pain and rage mixed into a volatile concoction. But I didn't let it break through. Not now. There are things more important than emotions. Diana and Alex. They had disappeared after that night. I expected nothing less. Cowards run. especially when they know I'm coming for them. But they had no chance. I started with the basics. I checked the accounts, the latest transactions. Recalled all the places where Diana felt safe. Called in old army contacts who still owed me something. And, of course, they were found. A hotel on the outskirts of town. Cheap. Inconspicuous. For them, a hiding place. For me, a trap. But I didn't go there immediately. First, back to the hospital. To Sophie. I sat next to her, watching her breathing. She opened her eyes again. Did you find them? She asked weakly. Yes. Will you kill them? I didn't answer right away. I ran my finger over her palm, as if it could erase the memories of what they had done. They'll do what needs to be done. She nodded, asking no more questions. She knew, and that was enough. At night, I returned to the empty apartment. In silence, it's easier to think. I took out the phone from the man I had killed on the street. Messages, codes, photos of my family, and addresses. It was more than just betrayal. It was part of something bigger. Someone had been watching me for a long time, and now I was going to find out who exactly. I looked at Sophie's picture on the phone, smiling happy. She would never be like that again. They had broken her, but not me. I turned off the light. Tomorrow the hunt begins. The night once again became my only ally. The very darkness I once hated for its silence now seemed like a familiar veil under which I could hide my true face. The night asked no questions and offered no comforts. It simply existed beside me, looking on with the empty eyes of stars, like an old friend who knew all my secrets. The city fell asleep, but there was no peace inside me. I felt something dull throbbing under my ribs. Not rage, no. Rage flares up quickly and burns out just as fast. This was something else, heavier and stickier, like soot on the soul that water can't wash off and time can't erase. Sometimes revenge is not a flash of rage. It's silence. A long, profound silence inside, where nothing remains but cold calculation. I felt no rage when I stood before Alex in that moment. I felt emptiness, and that emptiness was far more terrifying. Catching him turned out to be easier than I thought. He tried to flee the city, thinking that time and distance could shelter him. But people like him don't know how to truly hide. They leave traces. Always. I tracked him down without undue haste, with the same cold-bloodedness with which one assembles a weapon before a mission. Found him in a cheap motel on the outskirts, wet, dirty, trying to dissolve in his own fear. He opened the door and didn't have time to say a word. A stock strike to his ribs. He doubled over like a paper doll. I applied zip ties to his hands and legs, pulling them so tight that he hissed in pain. It's time to talk, Alex, I said quietly, as if proposing a discussion about the weather. I chose a place perfectly suited for this. An old industrial hangar outside the city, abandoned many years ago. The roof had partially collapsed, and moonlight filtered through rusty beams, casting long shadows on the concrete. Inside, it smelled of dust, rust, and something rotten, the smell of forgotten places that no one looks into anymore. I dragged him out of the trunk like a bag of trash and pulled him inside, ignoring his sobs and pleas. No one would hear him here. Here, I could be myself. I tied his hands to thick metal beams, spreading them so his body stretched under its own weight. The ropes were coarse, cutting into the skin, leaving red stripes that would soon become deep wounds. I secured his legs on opposite sides, pulling him in different directions. He hung in the air, like a torn doll, helpless and pathetic. Now he was exactly where he should be. Robert, please, he rasped, trying to find any words. I stepped closer, leaning into his face. His eyes were filled with fear, the very fear I wanted to see. You said it wasn't personal. I laughed quietly, coldly, and emptily. But for me, it's very personal. I took a knife. Norus. Slowly, I dragged the blade across his chest, leaving a thin line of blood. He hissed in pain, muscles tensing, but the ropes gave him no chance to escape. You destroyed my family. You thought you could just walk away? I spoke calmly, as if this were a casual conversation. He gasped, mumbling something indistinct. Words no longer mattered. I pulled the ropes tighter, securing them so his body began to stretch under its own weight. Tendons strained, muscles cracked, and he howled in pain. And that scream, it was right. I leaned in closer. Did you know that pain is not just a physical sensation? True pain is when you realize that no one is coming to save you. I began to slowly tighten the ropes. With each turn, his body stretched more severely. He screamed, pleaded, promised. But I didn't hear him. I only heard the pulse in my ears, steady like a drum of war. His shoulder snapped first. Dislocation. He choked on his scream. I looked into his eyes, and there was nothing left but terror. Then the tendons in his legs snapped. The screams grew quieter. His voice broke, turning into a rasp. I didn't hurry. Every second stretched into eternity. I wanted him to feel everything, every cell of his body being torn apart. When the ropes were stretched to their limit, I stepped closer. He was already half conscious, face distorted by pain, lips bloody. I took the knife and carefully ran it across his throat, as if putting the final dot in this story. Blood spurted out in a hot stream, but he couldn't even scream, just gasped, eyes rolling back. I stood by as he stopped breathing, watched him like a piece of dead meat, because that's exactly what he was. A worthless, pathetic nothing. I wiped my hands, put away the knife, looked around the dark hangar, where his body still hung, stretched out, a reminder that one should not betray those who know how to wait. But inside me, there was emptiness. No satisfaction. No doy. Only silence. Alex's blood hadn't fully cooled when I stepped out of the hangar. The night met me with the same indifferent silence as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. Not outside. Inside. I thought revenge would bring relief. I was wrong. The emptiness remained. It gripped me from within. But now a new shadow pulsed within it, a question. The question that Alex left behind, even after his heart had stopped beating. You were part of the program. Those words were worse than any bullet. They stuck in my head, repeating over and over again like an echo you can't escape. I returned to his motel, to the place from where I had taken him that night. The room still smelled of cheap deodorant and fear. On the table stood an open bottle of cheap whiskey, an empty glass, a cigarette burned down to the filter. I began to search, unhurriedly, systematically, like on an operation, when you know the answer is hidden somewhere in the details. The first clue, a laptop. It was hidden under the mattress, cheap but equipped with military encryption. No problem. I knew how to bypass such locks. Memory is the most reliable weapon. But that wasn't all. Inside the closet, I found an old army backpack. Worn, but heavy. I opened it and realized that Alex was not just a pawn. Documents. Folders with seals, part of them erased, but I recognized those codes. Secret operations. Old orders. Some with my name. Operations I hadn't thought about for years. Operations I thought were buried along with those who participated in them. But the worst was not this. Among the papers, photographs. Not from the war. My family. Diana. Sophie. Me. Against the backdrop of a peaceful life. On the back of some photos, numbers, codes, dates. I recognized one of the dates. The day I met Diana. The world shrank to a point. My heart stopped. She was part of this. Not just infidelity. Not just betrayal. It was planned. I sat on the floor, spreading the papers around me. My mind worked automatically, connecting fragments into one horrific picture. Reports, accounts, analyses of psychological states. My state. Subject X, 17. That was me. In my own dossier. I read, disbelieving my eyes. Observation of response to stress factors. Testing the limits of emotional resilience. Scenario 3. Integration of family factors for deeper control. I realized that everything I thought was my life was nothing more than an experiment. Diana? Part of the experiment. Alex? A tool. Sophie? Collateral damage. On the last page was a stamp. Red, with clear lines that I could not forget. Protocol. Not just an organization. A global network. They weren't just creating spies and agents. They were creating people, shaping destinies, like a chess player setting up pieces. And I was one of them. A piece. I clenched my fists so tightly that nails cut into the skin. Blood dripped onto the documents, like the final signature on a verdict. But now I knew the truth, and this was the beginning of their end. I gathered the papers, took everything, left the room without looking back. Outside it was quiet, but inside me a storm was rising. Protocol thought I was an object, but they forgot one thing. I'm not a pawn. I'm a hunter. The house greeted me with the same silence I had left it with. Silence, a reliable harbinger of trouble. It demands no explanations, asks no questions. It just fills the void left by everything that once mattered. I stood in front of the door, keys in hand, fingers gripping the metal so tightly that my knuckles whitened. Took a deep breath. An ordinary house, an ordinary door. But behind it, a lie that had grown like rust on steel, penetrating every crack of my life. I opened the door, quietly, without hurry. Inside it was clean, too clean, as if someone had tried to erase traces, but forgot that the smell of betrayal can't be washed away with detergent. Diana was in the kitchen, sat at the table with a cup of coffee, as if nothing had happened. Calm, cold, as if nothing had occurred. She looked up. Something flickered in her eyes, not fear, recognition. She knew that I knew. I approached slowly, step by step. Each step echoed in my head like a countdown. We did not speak. Words were no longer necessary. Everything had already been said, without words. I just looked at her. She held my gaze, but I saw her fingers tremble on the cup. A fine, barely noticeable tremor. Not the fear of death, the fear of what comes next. And I was not going to kill her. Death would be too easy a fate. Revenge is an art. It must be slow, like poison that seeps into the blood, destroying a person from the inside. I wanted her to feel every second of her betrayal. I wanted her life to become empty, as mine had become. I leaned in close to her, almost touching her ear with my lips. You knew, Dot. My whisper was quieter than a heartbeat. She did not respond. She could not. I straightened up, looked at her one last time, and left, without looking back. Sophie. I went to her immediately afterward. The hospital greeted me with the familiar smell of antiseptic and the hum of machinery. But this time there was something different. Warmth. Not in the air. Inside me. Sophie lay in the hospital bed, pale but alive. She turned her head, seeing me, and a faint smile flickered in her eyes. Not a happy smile. A broken one. I sat next to her. I said nothing. Just took her hand in mine. Warm, fragile. I felt her gently squeeze my fingers. Are you okay? She finally asked, her voice weak, but with a hint of hope. I will be. I simply replied. We sat in silence. Sometimes words are superfluous. Just being there was enough. I stroked her hand, like when she was little. Back then, it helped her fall asleep after nightmares. Now it helped me. I told her something simple, insignificant, about the weather, about childhood memories, about how she learned to ride a bike and always fell but always got back up. She listened, and light appeared in her eyes. Small, but real. I was her rock, and that was how it was always meant to be. When I left the hospital, the sky was beginning to darken. The wind pulled at my jacket collar, but I felt no cold. Inside was warmth. The warmth of anger. Did Diana think I would leave her alone? No. I would return, but not to kill, to make her feel what it means to lose everything you believe in. This is not the end. This is the beginning of her hell. Revenge is not just a reckoning for pain. It is the architecture of destruction. Not a moment of anger, but painstaking work, where each step is a carefully constructed element. Killing is too easy. It provides instant relief, but is quickly forgotten. I wanted more. I wanted Diana to live and remember every second of what I did to her. The first step was to take her money. I knew where to look. After years of living with her, I had learned her habits better than she could imagine. Accounts, hidden funds, offshore transfers, I found them all. I didn't just empty her bank accounts. I made sure all her assets vanished into thin air. No money, no freedom. When her credit card stopped working, she probably thought it was a bank error. When she realized she couldn't pay for her apartment, she began to panic. When she was denied a new loan, she started to fear. Fear. There's the first nail in the coffin of her tranquility. The second step was to take her reputation. I sent anonymous letters to her colleagues and business partners. They contained documents she had carefully hidden. Schemes, fraud, corporate financial manipulations. It was all there. Truth mixed with lies. Enough to ruin her name. It didn't matter what was true. What mattered was that everyone believed. The company she was proud of turned away from her faster than she could grasp what was happening. She was fired without the right to reinstatement. From a successful businesswoman, she became a pariah that everyone shunned. The third step was to take her peace of mind. I wanted her to feel that I was near. Always. I sent her flowers. White lilies. Like for a funeral. No notes. No signatures. Just flowers. Sometimes I called her from unknown numbers and stayed silent on the line. Sometimes I left traces in her apartment. A slightly moved chair, an open window, closed not by her hand. Nothing that could be proven, but enough to make her question reality. Paranoia is the best poison. It eats away slowly from the inside, turning every shadow into a threat. I watched her downfall. She moved to a small apartment in a dirty neighborhood. Her hair became unkempt, her face gaunt. She no longer wore expensive suits, no longer looked down on people. She feared her own shadow. And rightly so. But I did not come to finish her off. I wanted her to live. She lived and remembered that her world did not collapse on its own. I was the architect of her destruction. And all this time, I was with Sophie. She was recovering, slowly but surely. I took care of her as I always should have. I made breakfast, brought flowers to the hospital, read aloud her favorite books. I did not show pain. I was the rock. Sometimes she asked about Diana. I simply replied, she's alive. She didn't need to know more. If someday Sophie wants to find her, let her. But it won't be the Diana she remembered. It will be a shadow, a remnant of a person who once thought herself strong. I stood on the roof of the building opposite her new apartment. Below, Diana walked down the street, hunched over in a cheap jacket. I watched her and felt nothing. Not hatred, not satisfaction, just emptiness. And that was enough. Time does not heal. It just makes the wounds less visible, turning them into scars, reminders that you survived despite everything. Scars do not hurt, but you always know they are there. Several months passed. The city greeted spring quietly, without unnecessary fanfare. The same gray, familiar backdrop that I once thought of as the backdrop of my empty life. But now there was something else. Anticipation. I stood at the hospital room window. Everything was familiar. The same smell of antiseptics, the same pale walls, the same rhythmic hum of machines in the distance. But today was not about pain. Today was about hope. Behind the door in the neighboring room, Sophie was giving birth. I heard her cries, intermittent, full of pain, and felt something inside me clench that I couldn't control. Not fear, not anxiety, just life. And in that moment, I was back where I had been many years ago, when I first held a tiny bundle with a little face and clenched fists. My daughter. Then I thought the world had stopped to remember that moment. Today was the same. The doctor came out of the room, removing his mask. His face wore that tired but sincere smile that I had seen only in two situations, when everything was fine or when it was all over. Congratulations. You have a grandson. I froze. The words slowly made their way into consciousness, as if my brain didn't want to accept them all at once, afraid it might be a deception. A grandson. I entered the room. Sophie lay there, pale, but with a smile so pure and true that the world beyond that room ceased to exist. On her chest, a tiny bundle. Life. New life. I stepped closer. She looked up at me, her eyes full of fatigue and happiness at the same time. Dad, meet him. I took the baby in my arms. He was tiny, warm, with little clenched fists and a frown on his face, as if he had already been disappointed by this world. I smiled. Hello, little one. Something clicked inside. Not pain. Not emptiness. Warmth. Pure. Unadulterated warmth. I sat next to Sophie, holding him, watched him sleep, breathe, move his tiny fingers. And I realized that it was worth going through everything for this. All the losses, all the scars, everything I thought had broken me. It wasn't in vain. I made sure Sophie didn't have to worry about anything. No anxieties, no fears. I bought a house in the country, where it is quiet, where the air smells of freedom, not steel and dust. I made it so she could just be a mother without looking over her shoulder. Sometimes I sat on the porch with my grandson in my arms, listening as Sophie laughed somewhere in the garden. And in those moments, I felt that everything that had been destroyed had not vanished. It had simply transformed into something new, into life.